Sergio Busquets is 33 years old, yet watching Barcelona, you can tell that he is still irreplaceable. I have spent hours, and I mean hours and hours and hours, trying to watch and figure out what players could possibly replace Sergio Busquets like for like in the Barcelona system. But what I keep finding is that not a single player in world football today, for a number of different reasons, do exactly what Busquets does. And I say that in the past tense and the present tense. There is no player that commands a game quite like he does from a single pivot position, especially with his defensive awareness, always being in the right place at the right time to prevent a counterattack. And though his physical limitations are making that harder and harder for him to do, he's never been fast. He's always been in the right place at the right time. So to find that kind of defensive awareness has certainly been a challenge. Still, for quite a few years now, Culés, and I usually mean the ones on the younger variety of things who expect that legends like Busquets are going to be able to age gracefully, have been saying that Busquets is past it and it's time to replace him. Unfortunately for them, Busquets is not past it. He's still the captain, and at 33, we don't know exactly when it'll be his time to go. I don't think it's at least in the next 6 months, but it could be soon. And so we do have to start thinking about that, and you have to think the club is already considering what that's going to mean moving forward as well. He will need to be replaced. And that timeline is really important because it could come as soon as next summer, which again I think might be a little unlikely, but Barca would probably like to, if they're attempting to replace him, if you will, like for like, already have that player lined up coming in over the summertime at the very least. But that's going to get tough because of all the different money that they would like to spend in other positions. You should certainly say that forward and back line are more important than replacing anybody in what is a crowded midfield, including Busquets. And that's why you'll find that in all realism, the replacement for Busquets is already going to be internal. You'll see with the first two names on this list, who I think you expect who they're going to be, that largely Barcelona will have to solve this problem using the players they already have, and that's probably going to mean a dedicated change of system. And I guess that's something we should hit now, because with Busquets being a single pivot, usually being a single pivot, it does beg the question, is the only answer to replace him to change to a double pivot? Is there one individual player that could do the job that Busquets does? And the job that Busquets has done for the last 12 to 13 to 15 years at Barcelona. Can one man handle all the responsibilities of that position? Across world football, even the likes of N'Golo Kante and Wilfred Ndidi for Leicester City, we look at players that are actually playing in a double pivot. The closest and best defensive midfielders in the world don't even do that job alone. Probably the two names that are closest to doing that single pivot job alone is Joshua Kimmich for Bayern Munich and Casemiro for Real Madrid. One of which is very unavailable. Well, Casemiro is unavailable too, but I would never want him at Barcelona. That said, Joshua Kimmich isn't coming to Barca anytime soon, so it does seem like whatever players we're looking for are likely playing in a double pivot now, and will likely try to have to feature in a system that Xavi has been talking about and rumoring about, and that is switching to a 3-4-3 consistently. Because even with those big names I named, in Kante and Kimmich, those are players that are different than Busquets. They just aren't the same profile. They don't open up the game the way he does, and they also use their legs in different ways. The points of confrontation are different with all those players, but I think that also has something to do with the players around them as well. All of them are supported by back lines that are, well, a bit more mobile. So they all get to take a few more risks. They don't need to sit on the ball the way that a Barca pivot is asked to do. He's asked to be very, very patient. A Barca pivot is always asked to make the right pass. He's always asked to make the right read. He's always asked to understand and dictate the pace of a game. He's also asked to always retain possession inside that third. And more in recent seasons as football, I don't want to say it's more athletic, but it has gotten a bit more direct. And we already saw that beginning with Luis Enrique at Barcelona, and that fact has continued around world football. Counterattacking, it gets in vogue from time to time, but now you've got to be direct. You've got to have just high-level, talented athletes who are able to execute this. And to get those athletes on the ball, though, you still need somebody who knows how to spray a fantastic long ball. Something that Busquets does arguably better than almost anybody else in world football. And that's a major quality that I'm going to be looking at as I continue on in this list. So since there is no replacing one of the greatest defensive midfielders in footballing history, I'm going to give you 10, and that's 10 possibilities for players that I think might be able to do a job, usually in a double pivot, to potentially attempt to replace what Busquets delivers. With Barca's financial issues, I try to be decently realistic with these. Some of them are a bit overpriced and probably out of Barca's price range, but you're definitely not going to see names like Rodri from Man City or Kimmich from Bayern Munich or even Yuri Tielemans from Leicester City. Those just aren't going to happen, so as I said, I try to be more realistic with these choices. So without further ado, let's get into it. One is Frenkie de Jong, because I think that ultimately de Jong is the answer, and that has to do with what I mentioned in the intro. A lot of the other things around Barcelona that need to be reinforced, that being the forward line or the back line, are more paramount to getting out in the market and finding those pieces and making do with what you have in a double pivot with Frenkie de Jong. I feel like I'm cheating a little bit with this because I don't think, as I said, de Jong will be a single pivot for Barca. I think Xavi will ultimately shift to a 3-4-3, as he has said before, and use 2 pivots and 2 high interiors, as he did at Al Sadd. Of those 2 pivots, though, will it be de Jong who ultimately becomes the playmaker from deep, or will he keep making those runs forward? It's interesting that it feels like de Jong would be better as a libero in a back 3 more than he would as a single pivot. But the reason de Jong is first on this list is that he's the player that is already being paid as a Barcelona superstar. Even if Barcelona wanted to upgrade with another midfielder to potentially take Busquets' place even as soon as this summer, they really can't. They have to fortify that back line and that forward line and the winger spot. So if you're going to send out Frenkie de Jong, you're going to have to bring in another midfielder that's almost exactly like him and maybe another one of the names on this list. So it really is a like for like, and you're replacing de Jong and not Busquets. That's why 2 is Nico Gonzalez, which is another bit of cheating because Nico works in tandem with de Jong. I think ultimately the defensive midfielder position, if you will, at Barcelona is going to be a double pivot with these 2 players. Interestingly, he played as a lone pivot under Garcia Pimienta with Barca B because both Koeman and Garcia Pimienta saw him as a pivot in the long run, but both Koeman and Xavi abandoned that notion with him in the first team. I think mainly due to offsetting Busi's mobility and the fact that Busquets is constantly on the field as the captain, and it's better to get Nico minutes at all than to have him just sit on the bench all the time and play 20 or 30 minutes just coming off the bench for Sergio Busquets. Nico needs to cover a lot of ground, as does de Jong, and the double pivot partnership between the 2, with Pedri and Gavi in front of them, could work for all 4 parties. I would want to warn people that Nico's long passing, as I said, was a main quality in how I'm constructing this list, and de Jong's long passing for that matter, aren't anywhere near as good as Busquets's, so Barcelona would look a lot different. 3 is Aurelien Tchouameni. The first time we've on this list gone outside of the Camp Nou walls and we're heading to Monaco, this midfielder who got his start at Bordeaux is my first pick to replace Busquets. If one player is going to, in theory, be able to play in both a double pivot and what I think could be a 4-3-3 and a very dynamic 4-3-3 with a lot of movement in that midfield, Tchouameni is my pick. I first mentioned him 2 years ago on this channel, so yeah, I will pat myself on the back for this. He has gotten nothing but better since I mentioned him here. He was playing for Bordeaux back then, and he's gotten better and better to the point where the 21-year-old who turns 22 tomorrow is probably now outside of Barca's price range. I'm going to reiterate the theme that Busquets likely won't be replaced by just one player, because Tchouameni regularly plays in a 3-4-3 as a double pivot alongside Youssouf Fofana or Jean Lucas at Monaco. And it's actually Fofana who delivers more balls into the final third. And usually I would rely on more data, but so many of my choices are young players who I think can do a lot more with some of the talent that Barca already has at its disposal. And I also think Tchouameni is still getting better, and his defensive skills are already elite. His progressive passing, though, shouldn't be understated. He doesn't score many goals or deliver the final ball, but he can dribble, he can pass short and long, he can switch the ball, and I think given a year or two, we'll be seeing that he's an elite reader of the game, which is truly the most important asset of any player coming in to replace Busquets. Yes, it's something to be able to get out of pressure and get yourself free, but it's another thing when Barcelona are taking those chances and losing the ball high up the field. Barcelona need a player that's going to be able to read the game at the elite level to make sure that that pressure that Barcelona is putting on their opponent never, ever stops. Unfortunately for Tchouameni, I think that he's already headed to the EPL over the summertime, and as I said before, I think he's going to be out of Barca's price range because they have to spend their money elsewhere. 4 is Bruno Guimarães, and I think this is a name that you did expect to see on this list alongside Tchouameni if you clicked on it. I would expect that you would have, because he, for Lyon, the 24-year-old Brazilian midfielder, has become one of the hottest defensive midfield prospects in world football. Tchouameni is my top pick, but Guimarães is rightly the 1B. He's extremely adept at getting the ball back for his team, and his 6 assists this season are a little example of how he fits into Lyon's attack. He would need to be in a double pivot due to the fact that he likes to get forward with the ball, much like de Jong, but he's awful successful at that. And as I've said before, that's not a problem when you have coverage. And what's interesting to me is what happens when Guimarães gets into the final third. He actually gets a bit more conservative and sits back and reads the game. At 24, he would be ready to take over from day one. Being Brazilian, there is something Casemiro-esque about him, which I think I gagged a little bit just saying it. But as much as I hate Casemiro and all his nonsense, Barca could use their own version of that. His tackling is superb, and he wouldn't be out of sorts at all in La Liga. He is likely on his way to Newcastle, you saw today, but if that deal falls through, which I don't think it will, Guimarães could very well still be on the market in the summertime if Newcastle do manage to get relegated. They're spending money not to, but hey, anything can happen in world football, so I wouldn't completely discount him. 5 is Lyon's Maxence Caqueret. It's weird for me to have two players in the same double pivot. You think that Lyon wouldn't be 11th place in Ligue 1 if both of their defensive midfielders were that good that they could potentially replace Sergio Busquets, but here we are on my list halfway through with two players already at Barca and two players now at Lyon. But hear me out on the Lyon part. The 3-4-2-1, a 3-4-3 with two high interiors for being realistic, that Lyon plays is a system and style that fits what Xavi wants, and quite a few of the weapons that Barca already has would enhance that formation. It hasn't been a great year for Lyon as a team, but Caqueret is still 21 and still improving. Every time I've seen him, this is a lot about the eye test with him, I've been impressed with his decision making. His long balls would need to increase in volume, and I'm not sure how he would handle that extra responsibility. But I do like his patience and reading of the game, and I would be interested to see how he fits alongside the likes of De Jong and Nico, guys who just run a bit more, like his friend Bruno in that double pivot that he plays for Lyon. So he would actually be a much more conservative approach and a lot cheaper as well. 6 is Marseille's Boubacar Kamara. I think it's a name that anybody who is already in the comments spanning the name Kamara expected to see here. He's a free agent, which certainly makes him a top pick, or should be a top pick on this list if Barcelona can pick up the phone and get something going here. The reason he's even number 6 on this list is, for me, he's actually a player where the eye test and the numbers don't match up. I've never been overly impressed with his passing, but the numbers do say that he's quite adept at delivering long balls. So what do I know? His time as a center back really helped his reading of the game, and those pressure regains are pretty good, even if his successful defensive actions aren't where I'd like them to be. He's 22 and still getting better, and has played in a double pivot alongside Guendouzi quite a bit for Marseille, with Kamara staying much more at home and Guendouzi having no interest in defending. But he's also played as a single pivot behind Guendouzi and Gerson. And while a willingness to get forward will need to be tempered a bit, as I keep saying, the likelihood that he'll be playing alongside De Jong or Nico means that he should always have coverage with some reps. Where this deal would get complicated is that I think the bidding war for his wages, remember, just because a player is a free agent is usually going to mean that his wages are much more competitive on the market. So I think likely Kamara will be heading to the EPL and Barcelona are going to miss out on him. 7 is Florian Grillitsch of Hoffenheim. We have spent most of our time, actually all of our time, in Ligue 1 and the Liga. But I think the Bundesliga does have a player or two to offer as well. Grillitsch at 26 is easily the oldest on this list, 2 years older than anybody else, but he certainly would be, I say conservative for Caqueret, but Grillitsch is certainly the conservative pick here, and I would even feel like he is a bit of a stopgap for what Barcelona need at the moment, and maybe you find some kind of blue chipper prospect down the road in a year or two even. Grillitsch would simply, probably I think, would be that 50-50 split time with Busquets, as Busquets over the next year or two continues to fade his way out of the club. Hoffenheim is in 7th place in the Bundesliga, and Grillitsch has been in and out of the lineup this season. But when he does play, either at center back or at defensive midfielder, results have usually followed. The 26-year-old Austrian is a defensive midfielder by trade, but his passing and reading of the game as a center back in a back three this season is what I'm looking at. He's a free agent, so he's a bit more realistic than a bunch of the others on this list, but rumors have him linked to the move to Italy, England, or potentially staying in the Bundesliga. I don't know how much higher his ceiling is at 26. He could add something different to Barcelona, but I would say he might be last on my list here of the players that I'd like to see at Barca. But again, he's one of those where if his name does pop up, don't get too worried. He actually does fit the profile of a player that could be very serviceable to FC Barcelona. 8 is Nice's Khephren Thuram. We're going in the complete opposite direction from Grillitsch with a conservative approach to a very speculative pick. And I think the most speculative pick with, we'll say, the upside that still needs to be realized of all the players on this list. I think another year, honestly, at Nice would suit him well. But he's got a pretty high upside, so Barca may be able to snag the player while they can still afford him. He was actually at La Masia in 2006 and 2007, being the son of former Barca player Aurelien Tchouameni. He's 20 and has only played 47% of all minutes available for Nice this season, so his timeline may actually fit Busquets' timing better than anybody else on this list, as far as a seamless transition. None of his current metrics aside from the 3 goals are anything to write home about though. He really isn't the hub of his team like Barca would need him to be. His progressive passing is still developing, but I think his physical reading of the game is what this move would be about, and I think that's the quality that he has now that is certainly going to continue to improve, and I think would be an asset for Barcelona defensively. He's also another example of a player that would fit well in a double pivot. So once again, we're talking about a double pivot more than just replacing Busquets with a single pivot. 9 is Real Sociedad's Martin Zubimendi. This one's tough because I think I'm actually getting this wrong, and I'm admitting to you that now. Mikel Moreno is the answer to this question about who from Real Sociedad would fit in at Barcelona. Moreno's a better player, and even Ander Guevara also had a shot, but I don't think Guevara's ceiling is anywhere near as high, and he's already 24. Zubimendi is about to turn 23, but he's the most natural defensive midfielder in a crowded La Real midfield that does include Moreno and Guevara, but now also includes Rafinha, which should continue to eat into Zubimendi's time. So if he can't break through in the Basque Country, how would he break through at Barca? That's a great question, and it's a similar one to Caqueret's. He would be a risk, though probably one on much lower wages than almost anybody else on this list, and he already knows La Liga. My reasoning for choosing Zubimendi over Moreno is the fact that Zubimendi is a defensive midfielder who would work in a double pivot, while Moreno is just more comfortable playing as De Jong or as Nico Gonzalez, and I think once again those skill sets would get quite redundant, and it seems to be one of the problems that Barca has now, so it doesn't really solve anything. So just bring in the player who is a defensive midfielder. He has played for the Spanish national team under Luis Enrique, so Zubimendi, I don't want us to underrate him either. And at 23, it's interesting how his timeline could potentially fit going forward, but he could be Bussi's understudy for a year and then take over. So once again, we're thinking about that timeline. But I'm also willing to accept that I might see more in this player than others do. His long passing and even his ability to completely read a game are not at the level it would need to be. It's one of those instances where, will he continue to improve? Will he fit better at Barcelona? I'm not sure about that. I think Real Sociedad's midfield is pretty gosh darn good, so I can totally understand if this is the one on this list that people are pretty skeptical about. 10 is Jandro Orellana. I would feel bad if I didn't put him on this list because we got to stick in-house. People were probably wondering, is there anybody from La Masia on their way up? And Marquesado is a bit raw, a bit too young, playing for Juvenil A, and even Alex Garrido for Barca B, he's just breaking in there. He's actually an attacking midfielder, not a defensive midfielder. So the answer continues to only be Jandro Orellana. However, as those who've been following this channel, the podcast, and Barca B this season, you know both last year and this year, he just can't stay healthy. If due to the personnel on the team, Xavi feels like he needs to go forward with a single pivot though in a 4-3-3, I can see Orellana getting a look. But at 21 and often injured for the second straight year, time is running out for him. In fact, Alvaro Sanz seems to be above him on the depth chart for Xavi, with Sanz getting inserted higher up the field with the first team to use his defensive instincts. Orellana reads the game well, but there are times when I wonder if he's not a playmaking 8 who still needs some cover in behind. For now though, he just needs to stay healthy and potentially stay at FC Barcelona. So we're going to have to put a pin on a player that is going to have to make that transition sooner than later. And number 11 is Franck Kessie. When have I ever stuck to 10 of 10 or the number that I told you I would give you? I felt a bit bad because I don't think Orellana truly deserves to be on this list. So I had to put Kessie, and it was also in the news cycle about the player, the free agent, who could be an option for Barcelona if they can get some kind of agreement now for the summertime. When all is said and done, like Kamara, I actually think the bidding war for his wages will take Barca out of the race, and he'll head to the EPL. But if the player wants Barca, they could do a lot worse than Kessie. He's generally been playing in a double pivot, like so many on this list, but he's usually the farther forward of the two, whether it's Bakayoko, Tonali, or Benacer next to him. The Algerian Benacer for AC Milan is actually the more like-for-like, even physically, replacement for Sergio Busquets. But Kessie would be the option for now and would change the way that Barca play. It would make them a bit more dynamic, and as I've said many, many times before, De Jong and Nico, and maybe even if you want Nico to stay upfield as a high interior, Kessie and De Jong would not be a bad double pivot for FC Barcelona moving forward. It makes them more mobile. They're also able to understand and dictate a game. And I think Kessie's passing is actually pretty underrated. All the metrics say that he is absolutely just fine. No, he's no Busquets. But as you learned, as we got to number 11 on this list, no player on this entire list can pass like Busquets. And I don't think there is going to be anybody in world football that can do that for quite some time. And if they do, they might be lacking in other categories like a Benacer. So Kessie's news and his future might already be decided by you watching this, but if not, I hope Barcelona picking up the phone and, like they're doing with the other free agents, at least inquire, at least give their pitch, say their piece, and see what happens. So I have been repeating a few of the same things throughout this video, and I'm actually surprised, having done this whole experiment of trying to figure out how to replace Busquets, not only how difficult it was, but how there is no single pivot out there. I looked, I'm covering every rock. It's going to be a double pivot, I think, moving forward. That's what I've learned from the replacing of Busquets. And it almost means that we do take him for granted. Doing the job he does with the defense that's behind him, no disrespect to them, but Busquets does what he does still at such a high level. He set an unrealistic standard for what a single pivot could be. His ability to read the game, both offensively and defensively, has been legendary for more than a decade. He's asked to do so much, and yes, he's physically struggling when the other team is barreling down on him, but I also don't think Barca has the personnel around him either to deal with that. In modern football, pivots are getting forward a bit more. It's your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn. And I think that's the future at FC Barcelona as well. And Xavi, whether it's the Cruyffian approach and Guardiola's lessons, football is continuing to evolve. And it is lazy to just say it's athleticism. It's not athleticism. It's a technical ability. It's the ability to read the game at such a higher level than everybody else and to get the passes where they need to go, which is what Busquets still does, even if his physical limitations are hurting him in modern football. And these pivots are being asked to both dribble and control the game with a long pass. Those are the two qualities that ultimately Xavi will be looking at moving forward as he tries once more to replace Busquets. He needs his defenders in a back three behind those two pivots to progress the ball forward. And some of the free agent names we're already seeing being thrown out there make sense to what Xavi's future plans hold. And those rumored names like Azpilicueta, who would fit into a back three, and Morata, who is just a number 9 that's going to bang the goal in. Let the creation come from those high interiors and the wingers. The double pivots are going to do their job and get forward when able, but that structure in the middle, the back three and the two pivots, it's all about making sure that Barcelona aren't cut through the middle and, again, continue to up the athleticism, the directness of this play through the wings and the high interiors, and number 9 just bang it in. So again, Azpilicueta and Morata, as I say many times, whenever you see a transfer rumor, yeah, sometimes it's just the agent trying to put the price up for their player or get them higher wages or get a higher transfer fee. But the players that Barcelona are heavily linked with, the ones that you could really trust, those kind of rumors, those are the ones that indicate what Xavi wants to do with his team moving forward. Because a reminder that he is going to have his first transfer window, I mean this is January, but I think he's going to have his first transfer window with a little bit of money to spend over the summertime. And while it was foolish to probably make this video in January of 2022, because I don't think Busquets is being replaced anytime soon, I do want to remind people that Father Time is undefeated. And you're right, Busquets is 33 and not getting any younger. So if anything, don't hate on Busquets. Enjoy him while you got him. And until next time, as always, Forza Barca.